we've taken a position so far, and the candidates have, through the process, a few have not, on basically Medicare for all, which is we're going to eliminate 150 million people's health care, and we're going to provide health care for people that just come over the border. That is an untenable position for the general election. As you know, George, I just biked around Lake Michigan, nearly 1,000 miles, through Michigan and Wisconsin, two really important states. Nobody at a diner ran at me and said, take my health care away. Nobody. This is reckless as it relates to, and you don't have to take the position to win the primary, and you're basically literally hindering yourself for the general election.
So I just want you guys to know that that was a Democrat. That's Rahm Emanuel. Had a whole bunch of roles in the Democratic Party. He was recently mayor of Chicago. He was a congressperson. He was Obama's chief of staff. He was an advisor to Bill Clinton back in the 90s. You know, he really is, of the upper echelon of the Democratic Party. And that is one hell of a garbage take. He's just lying on television. He was there with Chris Christie, and supposedly there's a Democrat and a Republican, and my goodness was it, two supposedly opposing forces joining together to attack the idea of basic human rights and dignity. And attacking basic human rights and dignity, Rahm Emanuel is known for that, whether it's education or the rights of people of color. Rahm Emanuel, not a big fan. Not a big fan of public education, not a big fan of rights for people of color, especially as it pertains to their relationships with law enforcement. He is emblematic of the systemic rot of the Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment. And he is emblematic of why somebody like Bernie Sanders is so important to bring progress to the United States, but also why Bernie Sanders is so terrifying to the social and political and economic elite within the Democratic Party and within the wider society. Rahm Emanuel is lying here, 100%. His basic take is that Medicare for all, which many of the Democratic candidates support, although not all of them, some of them do some of them do, partially. Only Bernie Sanders is 100% unequivocal in his support. That position is deemed untenable because it's going to take away health care from 150 million people, a lie, and it's going to help people who currently don't have status, which I think is a good thing. He's playing this very Republican-style argument that the government's going to take away your health care and give it to illegal immigrants. It's a racist argument, and it's a unfactual argument. And he goes on further to say, well, look, I've biked around, Michigan, and I've biked around Wisconsin, and no one told me they want the government to take their health care. Well, of course not, Rahm, you idiot. Let's be freaking real here. The goal of Medicare for all isn't to take people's health care, it's to give people the health care they need. For people who don't have it, they'll get it. And for millions of people who do have some form of health care, and yet it is inadequate in a variety of ways, they will get increased services. It's win-win for the vast majority of the American people, who will have a better system that will cost less and that will provide greater security, whether or not you're employed, or whether or not your employer decides to cut your health benefits, or whether or not you have benefits but they're inadequate. That is the baseline for any civilized society's approach to healthcare. And to typify that as taking away healthcare from, the majority of the American population is a lie. What takes away healthcare from millions of Americans is what's always taken it away from them. Losing their job, employer assaults on benefits, etc., etc., etc. That's what takes away healthcare from people. Not universal healthcare. That gives healthcare people. It's in the name, Rahm. It's in the goddamn name. And again, I can't stress this enough. His remarks, again, he doesn't mention a race of people, but his remarks are racially charged. He's basically adopting a Trumpian line. Rahm Emanuel here sounds like a Trump Republican. Not just a regular Republican, but a Trump Republican. Because he's not just saying like, oh, they want to provide Medicare for all, but it's too expensive, we can't afford it. Typical right-leaning Democrat/Republican line. We can't afford it, it sounds great, unfeasible fiscally. He's going further. He's lying about the nature of Medicare for all, saying it wants to take people's health care away, and he's juxtaposing it to this idea that we're going to give foreigners pouring over the border our good health care. And we all damn well know, given how Trump was successful, given Trump's rhetoric, what people flooding over the border supposedly look like, and what they believe and who they are and what language they speak and where they're from, etc., etc., etc. There's not too far a stretch to be made from Trump's speech when he came down the escalator and what Rahm Emanuel just said. They are of the same family. And again, this is a Democrat. At least ostensibly, this was a man who was a key cog in what was supposed to be the progressive ascendancy in 2008. But Rahm Emanuel is everything wrong with the Democratic Party. He would rather side with Republican, racially charged rhetoric and talking points and policy points than actually help people. Because at the end of the day, many of the Democratic elite do not actually care about the policies that supposedly underpin Democratic, progressive ideology. They care about protecting their wealth and their power and their privilege. And if they can do that through a right-leaning Democratic establishment, they'll do that, and they'll do that happily. They'll run against Republicans, they'll be partisan for the Democratic Party, and it'll be fine for them. But when someone like Bernie Sanders, or even modest as it is, someone like Elizabeth Warren, comes in and challenges them, then all of a sudden, there's billionaires saying they're going to run as independents. Or there's people like Rahm Emanuel spreading lies on national television. Because they would rather lose to Republicans than win with a progressive Democrat. Everyone talks about how Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat. He shouldn't win because Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat. Well, that's a good damn thing, because what we see is that a good chunk of the Democratic establishment is goddamn awful. They're awful. They spread lies, racially charged lies that attack the principle of Medicare for all. The principle that all people, men, women, and children, deserve basic human rights and dignities, and that includes healthcare. Rahm Emanuel is awful. He was awful as mayor of Chicago with regards to public education and racial justice, and he's awful in taking this Republican Trumpian stand. And I think it's good that even a lot of the mainline Democrats have moved away from Rahm's type of position. But let's be very clear. Rahm Emanuel is not an outsider to the Democratic Party. He is very much part of it. And if he's saying this thing in public, there are many Democratic elites that believe it too. So the fight is by no means over. Even if Bernie Sanders wins this primary, and even if Bernie Sanders wins the presidency, he will have a fight not only against Republicans in Congress and the Senate, but against people like Rahm Emanuel in the Congress and the Senate, on the Democratic side. This is why, as Bernie Sanders has noted, it's not just about him. It's about building a movement. It's about electing other people. Because the rot in that party will not go away, even with a Bernie Sanders presidency, at least immediately. If they're willing to say this, if they're willing to effectively endorse Trumpian viewpoints, then there's no telling what people like Rahm Emanuel will do to stop real progressive change. So we have to stop them.